Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Inner Changemaker. Guys and girls, I have a guest for you today. We have superstar himself, Nicholas Kusmich, on the show. Nick, welcome to the show, man.
Jay, man, thank you so much for having me. It is an absolute pleasure and an honor to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm really stoked to have you on. I know you chat so much about, Facebook ads, and you are just, I see you everywhere. This past year, I know we were just chatting, you've been doing a lot of speaking, and, your client list and people you've been able to help to get their message out there in a bigger way is tremendous. People like Joe Polish and that whole Genius Network.
Sure.
I guess, when I thought of having you on the show, I guess
Yeah.
my initial question was, when you started doing all the stuff that you're doing with Facebook ads, being,
Yeah.
The world's leading kind of like ad strategist, getting some of the largest ROIs in the industry, was that your intention? Like, did you have that intention that you were going to be world class when you started?
Yes and no. So the yes side to it is like every time I want to dive into anything,
Yeah.
to me it's let's do the best job we can. Now it doesn't necessarily mean let's try to get world class and let's be recognized and all that stuff, although that helps. But it's always let's do the best we can. And usually when you do the best you can at something, it elevates you to a space where you're, recognized in your space. But that being said, it's not like one morning, 10 years ago, I woke up and I was just like, man, I'm drooling. I'm chomping at the bit to run Facebook ads for people. Like back then, Facebook ads didn't even exist. So I think it was a unique, perfect storm, literally, of me being in the right place at the right time, the industry and the market speaking, me listening to what they were saying. And then gosh, it's either the universe or something or good timing or good skill set or a combination of all that kind of led to the evolution of where we are today. So again, back to your question, was it intentional? Intentional in that I wanted to do my best and make sure we produced the best, which is anything I kind of jump into.
Yeah.
But did I foresee this happening the way that it did? Yeah, not a clue. Every day is different and I'm excited to see where this is going. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know you have a really interesting, viewpoint, for example, on goals that I'm sure
Sure.
we'll touch on at a later point. But
Sure.
maybe for us to maybe build some context for the people that are watching this or they're listening to this, and for a lot of us that are maybe familiar with your work, we know that you work with the 7 figures, 8 figures, and like I said,
And beyond. Yeah.
and well beyond, and you really position yourself that way. And
Sure.
so growing up,
Yeah.
were you always, like, I guess, good at this type of positioning yourself with the best? Like, were you always achieving at such high levels, and did that help you in entrepreneurship early on?
Oh, dude, that's such a good question that no one's ever asked me from this perspective because it's bringing up a couple of things. Like, I don't know what happened, and I don't know, again, if this was the universe or this is just kind of how it rolled out. But when I was young, I felt like, looking at it in hindsight, I had what some would call the Midas touch. Essentially, whatever I touched turned to gold. And I found that when I was a kid, man, just a little kid, and I played sports, I would be the top athlete in my sport. I'd win the MVP trophies. When I was a little bit older, in school in 7th grade, I was the president of my junior high school. Even though it went to grade 9, I was the president in grade 7. Like, it was just all this kind of stuff happened. And I think what happened, unfortunately, was I let this get to me. I thought that I was invincible. I thought that I could do whatever I wanted to do whenever I wanted to, and I would, at any expense, achieve whatever level of success I set out to. And that happened early on, but that kind of messes with your head a little bit. So I don't know if it was the universe or it was just time or something. But right around, at some point, the universe turned around and said, this kid needs to be taught a lesson. He's taking way too much credit. He's ungrateful for the things that he has in his life.
Were you though?
Yeah, looking at it now, I think so.
Yeah.
Back then, of course, I'd be like, oh no, of course, I'm grateful for all this kind of stuff. But
Sure.
yeah, no, I think I was. I think there's a fine line between arrogance and confidence, and I think I straddled that line a little too much on the arrogant side and not so much on the confident side. So I think it was time for Nick to learn a lesson. And that put me into like a 7 to 9 year bout with Murphy's Law. And I think what made that so bad, and Murphy's Law, how I define it, is basically everything that could go wrong went wrong.
Mm.
I think what made it so bad was the fact that, I mean, if I kind of had a nice, easy coasting thing and things started to go wrong, that would be one thing. But when I contrast that with the highest of heights where I felt like I was invincible, and then now everything in life is showing me how invincible I'm not,
Yeah.
I smashed down. And it was like, you know that feeling where you hit rock bottom and you're like, okay, I'm at bottom, so there's nowhere to go but up from here.
Sure.
And then you realize, actually, I haven't hit quite bottom yet. And it was this depth of things just being ripped out of my life, relationships being ripped out of my life, finances being ripped out of my life. I lost my father. I mean, it was just this massive 9 year bout with all hell breaking loose.
Could you give us maybe like, I don't know, like just like I know you mentioned like your father passing.
Yeah.
But can you give us maybe an example of like when you think you hit rock bottom and
And it getting worse.
and it somehow got, I mean, maybe not the best thing to kind of bring up, 6 minutes in type
Sure.
thing, but
Yeah.
just to maybe get
Put some context around it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, literally by the time I was about 17, or maybe 19 or so, again, my dates are not perfect, but at some point in my life, I'd done quite well. I saved a lot of money. I put it into some high yield investment opportunities because that's what Rich Dad told me to do. Put money into assets that then pay for your liabilities, and you can live the life you want. So I followed that to the T, man. I made some good money. I put it all, like literally 100%, into investments. Much of them were high yield, high risk investments, which wasn't the smartest thing, now learning on it on hindsight. But at one point, I mean, I remember, I think I was 17 or 18 or 19 or whatever age I was. And I was making something like 15, 20 grand a month passively with no work because the investments were paying for this. So I'd gotten to the point where I was living a comfortable lifestyle at such a young age. I was, I guess, quote unquote, retired. And then whatever it was, 2007 or whenever that massive crisis hit,
Right.
the stock markets went crazy and bonkers. And I lost probably half my portfolio in the blink of an eye. Not too long after that, I realized that some of the people that I invested with ended up being just scammy, scummy, bottom of the earth type people and stole the other half of the percent. So literally I went in a matter of 2 or 3 months from, living a certain lifestyle, to having all that taken away and living to zero. Because again, I wasn't working anymore. I mean, I was just doing what I was doing. I had this income coming in. I was listening to Rich Dad. He told me to do this. The passive income was working. I was happy. And then again, in a matter of months, I went from, 15, 20K a month in passive income to zero. And the problem with that is I was living a 15 to 20K a month lifestyle. So bam, I go from like having all what I need to like having literally nothing. And that's just like, that was one rung. And so now I'm trying to deal with this. Then after, some of that happened for a little bit of time and I was trying to figure this stuff out. I'm scrambling. I'm like, I need to make ends meet. So I had a conversation with an old friend of mine who was involved with some business, and he said, "Hey, you need to meet with this guy. He has some opportunity for you." So
Yeah.
I ended up meeting with this guy. He had some opportunity, and man, I was stupid. I was young. I didn't understand how economics work. I didn't understand how business works, and I found myself in the middle of another scam, one that ran so deep. God, I never told this story, Jay. I don't know how you're pulling this out of me. One that ran so deep that I found myself, and I don't know, we're both in Toronto.
Yeah.
Right beside Dundas Square, there's this old school wholesale jewelry building. I don't know if you know it. It's probably one of the shadiest buildings in all of our city because there's so much kind of like mafioso stuff going on in there. And I remember finding myself in a room who was from this jeweler. And I remember I was sitting in the room with one other guy, and he was there threatening my life, and 2 guys behind him holding shotguns at us and saying, "Look, you need to get us this money." And I just remember this like tail spinning into where I'm in Denver airport. I get a call on my cell phone, and the same guy is calling me, threatening my life and my family's life if I didn't get this money. Like, it was just a mess. Now, as if that weren't bad enough, not too long after that, I'm sitting in my bedroom, like I'm just trying to figure out now how to make ends meet and how to make things happen. It's
Sure.
getting worse and worse and worse. Plus, by the way, in 2005, my dad passes away, and that dealt. I had a bunch of emotional like stuff to deal with that. We can dive into all that as well. But I had a bunch of emotional baggage where I had kind of made some deals with God. Faith was a big portion of my life at the time. I'd made some deals with God to let dad live, this, that, the other. Of course, I was just speaking through my ass. But when dad passed, I had a whole bunch of issues with God and the universe and all these other unmet promises as well.
Right.
Fast forward a bunch of years after that, I find myself in my home office, literally sitting at my IKEA desk at 1 a.m. My wife at the time walks in and essentially, long story short, tells me that she's having extramarital affairs and has been for the full 3.5 years that we've been married. So that puts
Wow.
another tailspin on things where all of a sudden things are going downhill even further. I end up losing my house, going homeless. Now, when I say homeless, I don't mean I'm sleeping on the streets, but what I do mean is I didn't have a home, so I'm sleeping wherever I could until I can get things under my feet. That coupled with, again, I mean, we haven't even skimmed the surface, Jay, but it
Oh
was
my
like
goodness, Nick.
literally you hit bottom and it's like you think you're there and then something else happens. You hit bottom, you think you're there. And really, at the end of the day, I think it was just universe was teaching me, the divine was teaching me a lesson and saying, kid, you've got to smarten up. There's a life that you need to lead, but with your attitude and your experience, you're not going to get there. So we need to teach you a little bit of humility, a little bit of
Mm,
gratitude, a little bit about what's important in life, i.e., people are not a means to an end. People are the end, which was a big shift that I had to have in my own life. Um, and then, it's funny looking back. I mean, I have this conversation with a good friend of mine, Giovanni, who's responsible for a lot of things. But it was only like 2.5, 3 years ago that things really took a positive turn for me. And then the last 3 years has been a whirlwind of experience that's taken to where we are today. But yeah, by God, it was a crazy trip to get here.
my goodness. Oh man. Oh man.
Yeah,
Nicholas, you've been through so much. So how does like, cause, from, and this is one of my first times, like, getting a chance to not only interact with you, but getting you to, like, to tell the story and
sure.
for me to kind of hear this. Like, what is someone, like, if someone's, like, listening to this, maybe they're going through, something that's similar, or maybe they're going through some kind of tough times. Like,
Yeah,
do you remember, like, what you focused on, like, in those moments?
yeah.
When it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. Because looking at your brand now, it seems like it's the inverse that's happening. Maybe we'll,
Well,
we'll
thank
get to
God.
that.
Yeah,
Right,
sure.
and that's always easy, but they say it's always easy when things are easy. It's easy to
Right.
do, to be in gratitude. It's easy to
Sure.
say, "Oh, I do the visualization or whatever."
Yeah.
So like, what did you focus on during that period when things just kept getting worse and worse?
Well, I mean, frankly, at the beginning, I was just focusing on how bad it was, and it got me to the point where I have what I call my 117 moment. And my 117 moment was again sitting at that same IKEA desk, looking at Google and typing into Google the easiest way to take your life. Why I call it my 117 moment is because I literally looked up at the clock and it was 1:17 a.m. at that time.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to pretend that it was easy, and I'm not going to pretend I didn't want to be a coward and bail on this whole thing. But there are just a couple things in the back of my mind, just kind of reminding me, hey, that's a cowardly way out. And plus, at that time, again, my mother was widowed. I'm an only child, so the thing in the back of my mind was like, you can't leave mom behind. That's not fair to her. But then I think the two kind of key shifting points that really pulled me out of this is one. I don't know what movie it was, but there's this movie where this girl has cancer and she falls in love with another guy who has cancer. And they were having this thing, and she was reading a book, and one line that stuck out to me, and I still remember it to this day. Um, the line was, "Pain was meant to be felt." And that speaks to me volumes because back then I always thought pain was something to be avoided or something to be overcome. And when I got to the point where I said, you know what, let's not try to rush through this. This feels really bad right now. Life is not fun right now, but rather than trying to like rush through it or overcome it or ignore it or break out of it or whatever these inspirational gurus tell us to do, um, I was like, let's just actually experience this to the fullest extent that it was designed for me. People always talk about living in the present, living in the now, and living in the fullness of the moment. That also means you're not so great moments, and there's lessons to be learned and things to be felt and things to encounter during that time. So the first kind of little bit of a tipping point for me, or that shifted, was when I just embraced the whole thing. And I was like, I don't know what I'm to learn in this. I'm not going to make up meanings from this, because I think it's really easy to make up meanings.
Right.
Just like, I'm not going to bother trying to make up meanings. I'm not going to try to make sense of all this. I don't think that's the entire point. If I kept asking why, I would just put myself in a further tailspin down. So I'm not going to ask why anymore. I'm going to say, well, here I am, and let's just experience for the fullness of it and live through this and all of its pain and anguish and all of its ugliness. And the second part is, instead of asking why, I changed my question to, well, what now? And that what now question, rather than saying, why is this happening? It's like, well, it happened and it's good. Let's live it. And then what now? I think the only thing that really pulled me through this, that I had a handful of really great people who just loved on me and said, Nick, I don't need to know details. I'm not here to give you advice. I'm not here to give you counsel. I'm just here. Like, if you need a shoulder to cry on, I'm here. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. Let's not talk about this stuff. Let's just like get through life as like partners and friends and that. So, having those people, I think, are just a handful of people who are willing to love on me and not judge me and allow me to experience grace in its truest extent, like undeserved, unmerited love. Is what kind of slowly got me through some of those times. And I think that is, I mean, again, no advice in the world, no book in the world, no seminar can do that. It's just when you experience grace at such a deep level, you're able to come through. And then, the benefit of that is, like, now when I say, like, and I don't dock this by any means, but I hear these people who have like gratitude practices,
Sure.
just to be reminded to be grateful, or put a penny in your shoe, so every time you feel that you're grateful. I've heard all these sorts of things, and
Yeah.
I think that's fine, and I think that's great. But for me, that's like almost manufactured gratitude, where if you have to be reminded of it, maybe you're not actually grateful. Maybe you just have to go through the motions, and maybe it'll kick in one day. I'm not saying that against that, but I think for me, I think when you just have everything stripped away from you, you have no choice at this point to be grateful. Like, I don't need a practice. I don't need a reminder. I don't need to slap my wrist with an elastic band reminding me. It's like, man, every moment of every day that I have right now, I'm just grateful that it's there. And I'm also reminded that in successes, like, all of it could be gone tomorrow. Which also keeps me very kind of grounded and grateful for what I do have, and not to take advantage of, what we currently have going on. So yeah.
For sure. For people that are listening to this, you guys got to follow this man, Nicholas Kusmich. His main hub, I believe, is nicholaskusmich.com.
Right.
And I know you run a really great Facebook group. I'm in it for Facebook ads. But,
Sure.
Man, I had no idea. I mean, I'll be really honest with you.
Yeah.
And when we initially set this up, my initial thinking going into it is like, we're not going to talk about Facebook ads. I was like, God. I've heard Nick talk about God. Facebook ads, and he's, this man has so much content already. I've watched so many like hours and videos.
Yeah,
I appreciate talking about Facebook ads. I was like, I really want to know what went on, like, as you built this world-class brand. And it's just amazing for you, to hear and to see that you really embraced everything.
Right.
The good, the bad, and everything in between to really get to where you are. I think that's such a missing integral part, because everyone, they want to love on the good. They only want the good,
right? But
they don't want to take the bad that comes with the journey, or comes with, the whole thing.
Yeah, and everyone's in a rush. I don't know what the world has been telling us, but it's almost like you don't have enough time. You need to get there now. If you don't get there now, you're a slacker. You're an underachiever. We have time, and I have all the time in the world. And I don't mean that from an esoteric standpoint. Like, yeah, I get it. Time is going to run out at some point, and that time may be any time. But I think what that just puts us into a mindset of is, if we're always looking to achieve the next thing, we never appreciate the thing that we currently have. So if anyone's listening and just kind of chasing and in this constant grind of quote unquote #hustle, like, slow the hell down, enjoy the things before. It doesn't mean work hard, like, work hard. I work my ass off. But it also at the same time means, like, when you get there, I mean, this is probably a whole nother conversation, but what I realized is, like, if you're moving towards a destination, usually there's only two things happen that when you get there. One, you realize that it wasn't as great as you built up in your head. So you're like, huh, that kind of sucks. I'm not as happy or as fulfilled as I thought I might be. Or two, you get there and then immediately you start pointing your direction to the next destination.
Yeah.
And so it's this kind of like perpetual chase that we live in. And I think at some point people just need to like calm down and relax, realize that we have time and we're not in a rush to get anywhere.
Yeah.
And we make the most of our opportunities, granted. But at the same time, we don't have to be in this constant chase, because then you can never actually sit back and enjoy what you in fact have.
Mm. Nick, there's so much truth in what you were just saying. It reminded, I mean, it's actually a really great transition. But it reminded me, I used to work in this company, called Strategic Coach. So
Oh yeah,
I know you mentioned Giovanni. So,
yeah,
one of Dan Sullivan's like concept is this concept called the gap, right?
right,
Which you probably know of it. But,
yeah,
just for everyone who's listening or watching, really simply, it's, when you set the ideal, it's your goal, it's, your ideal where you see yourself 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is, the big vision, and then you walk towards it, right? And
right,
usually people start measuring their self-worth against their ideal. And of course, you're never going to beat your ideal. You're never going to beat your hero. So
right,
obviously you start getting into these like, negative emotions. I'm not deserving. I'm not good enough, all that kind of stuff. Right. And then the trick to combat this is to really measure backwards.
right.
Where were you 3 months ago? Where were you 6 months ago? Where were you 3 years ago? Look at the
Hmm.
journey, right? It's kind of what we've done, I guess, up until this point. But, maybe tell us maybe your opinion on goals, because I know when the first time I heard it, I was like, finally, someone said it, that goals, like, I don't remember the exact wording, but you said you're not a fan of goals.
Right,
I'll tell you why,
right.
so
Yeah.
tell us why.
Wait, and keep in mind, whenever I share anything, it's just kind of birthed out of A, my experience, and B, my opinion.
Sure.
So I'm not one of these guys, and I think there's a danger in this that I see all over the place. It's like my way is the only right way to go. Like my morning routines means everybody's got to follow my morning routines.
Right,
Like
right,
my way of doing this is the best way and the only way. Look, this is just it for me. But I mean, this was birthed out of this experience where again, I read Think and Grow Rich, and it tells me that I should have a paragraph of my ideal life scenario and read it first thing in the morning and late thing at night. And I watched The Secret, and I put my vision board on the bloody wall with the cars I wanted to drive and the houses I wanted to live in and all this stuff that I wanted to have. And I had $1 million bill there, and I just had it all because that's what the self-help world told me to do. And I found, just for me, I hate goals. I think they're useless. I'm a fan of maybe having a direction that you're kind of moving towards. I think there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, I mean, goals for me were in its simplest kind of form, were a constant reminder of what I did not have or the lack. So when I set a goal, essentially I'd be like, hey, that's my vision board. That's where I'm going. And for some people, they're delusional in thinking that that goal is actually motivating them to move towards that direction, which may be true for certain people. But I know for me, the goal didn't provide motivation or positive energy. It provided negative energy because, again, all I could see was the gap between where I am and where I want to be. And rather than that encouraging me, I was just ungrateful. I was like, well, I should be there. Why am I here? Like, what the hell is this?
Right, right.
And so, again, rather than being truly grateful for what I had and being grateful for that which was around me, I was just constantly focusing on what I didn't have. And so that started to create a negative thing. That was one thing. The second thing about it was I realized that 99% of the goals I've ever set out in my life ever never got accomplished, either because I couldn't get there or because I pivoted. I mean, how many times do we change our mind? We change our minds all the time. And so anytime I set up a goal, what this created inside of me, and watch this, is like if you say, hey, I'm going to set out to achieve something. And even if you don't even tell the world that, but you tell yourself that, and then en route you don't accomplish that for whatever reason. Maybe you change your mind, maybe you pivot, maybe you don't get there, whatever it be. You are now actually telling yourself and your subconscious that you can't be trusted. Because every time I say I'm going to do something, I don't actually do it, which shows there's a lack of integrity there. And now your subconscious and your mind all of a sudden treats yourself as a liar. And then you get this kind of other perpetual thing going on top of seeing the gap in the negative energy. Now you're calling yourself a liar. Yourself doesn't trust yourself every time you set out to do something. And that kind of stacks all up on each other. And then on the third side, it's kind of what I already alluded to. There's only really one of three things that can happen when you set out a goal. Number one, you never achieve it and you feel like crap about yourself. And you think, what if? What if I could? Number two, you achieve it. And it doesn't kind of bring you any more fulfillment whatsoever. And that's what I had found. Like I had set up all these things on my vision board. And the amazing thing was not because of the vision board. I ripped down that thing off my wall. But I found myself having achieved everything that I ever wanted to set out for. I had the car that I wanted to drive. I lived in the house that I wanted to live in. I had the money that I had set out for, and it didn't make me any happier or any more fulfilled or any more excited, which then kind of just drove me to try and accomplish more. So I think what happened with me, and if I look at anything that's happened in my life, it goes back to the fact that I never had a goal. I had some intentions, maybe some directions, but if you asked me 7 years ago, would you be running a Facebook advertising agency? I'd say no. If you asked me only a year ago, would I be doing these 2-day intensives that are now changing the lives of tons of people and reaching millions of people? I would have said no. It was never in my forecast, never in my business plan, never in any of that. Literally, that came out of because my wife and I were sitting in a seminar, a workshop. It was the worst. It was the worst workshop we've ever been to. And basically, it was a perfect example of what not to do. And out of mere frustration of spending all this money, I spent 10 grand to be there. I'm sitting there in a workshop, and I'm like, this sucks. And out of mere frustration, I'm like, I'm going to do something better that when people leave, they're going to love. And this is why I'm going to do it. And it's going to be so much different than what I'm in. Again, not part of our business plan, had no idea that it was going to be a part of our reality. And now it equates for, 30 or so % of our revenue in our business. So, for me, it's just always been, you could set them, and if it helps you and it serves you, great. But at the end of the day, I think goals prevent us from pivoting and being agile in the way we need to. I think goals oftentimes set up negative energy rather than positive energy. I think goals set us up for failure, and all these things are not really all that positive for people. So I like moving in certain directions and trusting that as I'm on there, I may change direction just a little bit, knowing that I may never get there, but on the way, I'm going to learn some crazy things and do some fun things. So yeah.
Nick, it's tremendous what you're saying, because I think it's a lot of people that make goals and go through the, Think and Grow Rich. And,
Sure.
I had Bob Proctor on the show a year ago, and
Nice.
I was like, Bob, what's the secret? What's the secret sauce? Like, how did you do it? Right. And he said, I just read Think and Grow Rich every day.
Of course. So did everybody else.
And I was like, well, I got the book. I'm saying what the book says. I'm not blowing up like Bob Proctor, right? Yeah. And it's like, well, and so it's great because I think a lot of people sense this kind of stuff,
sure,
right? But they don't, they don't do it themselves. And
sure,
you have this, it's like this confidence, but it's more like this trust in yourself. It's more like you listen to your intuition. You're sitting at the workshop and you said, you know what, I want to do like the inputs, this.
Right.
And then maybe have that built into my business.
Right.
For a lot of people that are thinking, or maybe they're, in business themselves, they're solopreneurs, they're making targets, they're making goals. I guarantee you one of the first things they're probably thinking about is like, how did he know that it was going to work? Like, how did he, validate it? Or how did he think that was going to be a successful thing? Or was it really just like my intuition? Like, I've been listening to my intuition my whole life. I know it's good. So when there's a spike there, I listen to it.
Yeah, well, I think I got to the point now where I can trust my intuition.
Okay.
But that wasn't the case before. But here's the reality. I love how a solopreneur would be asking about certainty. There is no such thing. Like, certainty about what? That you're going to be in business tomorrow, that you're going to make the money that you achieve, that all your clients and customers are going to love you the next day, that there's not going to be a massive shift in the marketplace, and what you once had, you could be the Kodak that ends up going out of business because digital photography, like, there is no such thing as certainty. So when I got this idea to do this, let's say the intensive, because we're talking about that, when I got this idea, I'm sitting there in a seminar, I'm like, this sucks, let's do something better. When I first got that idea, everything inside of me said, why waste your time? It's not going to work. It doesn't make sense. And the other side of me said, well, that's probably true, but what if it does? And I just went into it saying, let's just do it and see what happens. Because the worst that could happen is I lose a little money and I lose a little face and it doesn't end up working the way that I wanted it to. And so be it. I had a good experience and all of life is learning. And so you just take that and you like chalk it up to, the school of hard knocks. Let's,
Yeah.
graduate that grade and move on.
Yeah.
Now, fortunately for me, following that intuition actually led to some great things. But I'll be honest with you, there's some times where I didn't necessarily follow intuition. Maybe I followed profit or currency or something else that kind of led me a little bit astray, and the stuff I fell flat on my face. So yeah, I think any entrepreneur who is waiting for some level of certainty before they make a decision about something, you're going to be waiting a whole long time. Like there is just no such thing. And I think as long as you're willing to have the thick skin to say, hey, if I go and I fall, it's going to be okay. I'll just get back up. Then I think that's kind of the greatest attribute that we need to have is just the ability to try something, get the learnings from it,
Yeah.
and then sometimes, frankly, understand when it's time to quit. I mean, sometimes, I love the ambitiousness of some people to say never give up. Yeah, sometimes you need to give up on an idea. Sometimes you need to pivot your business because that's not going to work. So I think it's just being aware of that. But at the end of the day, yeah, just like let's try things. We don't know if they're going to work. Let's hope they do. Let's get a little bit of validation, learn along the way.
Yeah.
If it does, keep flying with it. And if it doesn't, then let go and move on to the next thing.
Okay, so let me ask you this, because there's probably a lot of people that, everyone hears this type of like experimental, you want to like run it as experiments, right? I think it was,
right.
I think it was the first time I heard of it was like from James Altucher. Like just
Sure.
view everything, or maybe Tim Ferriss, like view everything as an experiment, 66-day experiment, whatever it is, right? How do you go about because you mentioned like if someone would have told you like years ago you're running the largest a boutique kind of like Facebook ad agency,
Sure.
maybe you wouldn't have believed them, or if you were running these intensives, you might not have you didn't even have that idea like a year and a half ago. So
right.
what's maybe your process in terms of validating the things to spend the time and energy on, and especially now that you have maybe a bigger team or people around you, how do you kind of allocate the time and resources to do so?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, again, and this might be a bit of a cop out of an answer, but to me, I think the greatest form of validation is when someone is willing to transact with you on some level. And I think there's two currencies that someone can transact with you. One is time and the other is money.
Yeah.
So if someone was willing to give me time and or pay me money for an idea, then that's validation enough for me to say that there may be some legs here. But if I'm putting out a product and nobody pays me, or if I'm putting out an offer for someone to spend some time with me and nobody's there, then that's going to be kind of, in its simplest form, validation that that's not something working. So for me, like, how do I validate an idea, or how do I think it is? I think it's a combination of two things. I don't get very many ideas all that often. Well, let me take that back. I do, but I don't act on them. I think one of the biggest problems, or one of the biggest diseases of entrepreneurialism, is infobesity. It's this massive consumption of content and doing jack with it. So we have all these people who are kind of like going out and consuming information and attending conferences and shaking hands with people and networking and going on the web and studying all these things that may sometime one day be of use to them. They get these quick dopamine hits of like, hey, I bought something and I kind of read some of it and I have a great idea of something I want to do. But it's what our industry calls like chasing shiny objects. Going back, and this is a little bit of a rabbit tail, but my most productive year that I've ever had, and the most substantial growth of our business happened in the time frame where I went on an information fast, where I said, I'm not listening to podcasts for this entire time. I'm not going to be reading books. I'm not going to be attending conferences. I'm not going to nothing, any form of content. I am just not going to consume, because I'm trusting that of all the information that I already have and of all the relationships I already have, inside of that already lies a multi-million-dollar idea or a business. And if I just actually go back and implement some of the stuff I already know to be true and actually stay focused, then I think I'm going to get some great results. And that year we literally just focused on, I said, right now I could be doing Twitter advertising. I could be doing YouTube. I could be doing Google. Everyone's talking about LinkedIn and all this other stuff and Snapchat and whatever the hell else is out there. And I'm like, you know what? No, I know Facebook. We're gonna double down on Facebook and make this what we do. And at that time, this was pre-intensive. I'm like, well, should I have an information product? Should I be an expert? Should I be a speaker? Should I write a book? And I'm like, yeah, I'm not gonna swear. I don't know if we're allowed to swear on this podcast.
Do as you may. Whatever the story brings out.
But I'm like, hell no. Screw all that. I know the lane I am swimming in right now, and it's running a boutique Facebook agency, and it's to make sure that I'm serving my clients to the best of my ability. And I will not be distracted by anything else. So, I think one of the problems that entrepreneurs often have, and Carl White taught me this concept. He calls it the idea of broken bridges. Where we're at point A and we're trying to get to point B. So this is where we are. This is kind of a goal that we want to accomplish. And so we get this idea, oh, maybe Twitter ads is going to help me get there. Yeah. So we start building a bridge of Twitter ads. And as we're like building it, something else, we see this other great thing and they're like, oh, no, you got to try LinkedIn. So before we ever we abandon the Twitter train and we get on LinkedIn, or we hear like, oh, you need to write a book because everybody writes books, or you need to start a podcast because all real people have podcasts. And so we start building these bridges that never actually get completed. And so hence broken bridges. Yeah. And we're so busy thinking we're making progress, when in fact, if we just look back, we see all these broken bridges, and we were busy, but we never actually got anything done. So for me, I love the idea of having ideas and validating the ideas and seeing what we can do with them and pivoting and that sort of thing. But at the same time, like, I am laser focused about what I need to be doing. Back then it was my agency and building that up, but now, we have a 3-month wait list, and we'd say no 99% of the time. So I don't have to worry about the agency anymore. Then it was our intensives. And in 2017, our big focus is we sold out all of our intensives in 2016 months in advance. That's my goal for 2017. And then the third part about it is, as we're kind of talking about this offline, halfway through 2016, I'm like, I want to start speaking. I think it's going to help my business. Yeah. So I made some intentions, and then since then, mid-2016, I've been on a stage almost every 3 weeks. I've been able to share the stage with people like Seth Godin and Robin Sharma and Gary Vaynerchuk and Sean Stevenson and some, big powerhouses. But I just set my intention. I said, this is where my focus is. I'm not going to be distracted with all the peripheral stuff. And hey, like you said, if it works, great. If it doesn't, then I'm no big loss. I'm going to step away from this scene, and I'm going to, go back into my little corner and do what we do. So, I don't know how we got off on that, but
well, no, I mean, Nick, just listening to you and like summarizing in my own mind, telling us, yelling at us to be patient, you know what I mean? And telling us to focus, right? Sure. I mean, those are some of the biggest things that it seems really overly basic, right? But, so many people have said it, but like, common sense is not common practice.
Sure.
Right. And so I love that, you're bringing back the fundamentals, and that's what, that's what the greats do, is that they practice, the fundamentals. So guys, you need to be following Nicholas Kusmich, nicholaskuzmich.com. I have a couple last questions here.
Yeah, let's go.
You are, when I look at some of the stuff that you've done, I think you did it even in this interview. You always have like these, you have like a really good naming strategies.
Yeah, sure.
Like you're really great, like memorable names, like the 117. And I've seen you do it in like courses. You always like give us like, something to kind of latch on. Maybe it's like a dopamine thing. I don't know. Have you always been like really good at like naming things?
Not so much, but I realized people don't like concepts. They like ideas that they can latch onto. And again, I probably learned this from seeing great people give great frameworks. I mean, if you look at, one of the greatest frameworks in the world, Stephen Covey came out with like the 7 Habits of Effective People or whatever it be, something like that. I mean, he could have approached it very differently, but he built a framework and he put a name on top of it. So for me, and again, I go back to this idea, and I teach this. It's where I look at a massive company like Beachbody, and when they came out with P90X, which is probably one of the most well-known fitness kind of all programs in the entire world. I believe that when we go into a marketplace, we can communicate on one of 3 levels. Level number 1 is the promise, which is essentially, this is what I promise I can do for you. So in P90X's example, they could be like, well, I'm going to show you how to get ripped and lose weight. But how great is that? Like nobody remembers that. Everybody and their mother is saying that. Beyond the promise, you can move up and say another way you can enter into a marketplace is through your positioning. Now, P90X did a great example of that because when they came on the scene with P90X, everybody was all about like easy weight loss, like the non-diet diet or like the 4-minute workout. And P90X took a contrarian position and they said, essentially, this is a workout for badasses. You got to work out 90 minutes every day for 90 days. You're going to hate yourself and you're going to hate me and you're going to sweat and you're going to cry and it's going to suck, but you're going to come out ripped. So that was a very contrarian position, and people latched onto that even further because they're like, oh, that's kind of cool. That's different from what everyone else is saying. But even that wouldn't have made them the multi-million-dollar business that they gazillion dollar. I mean, they did close to $1 billion in sales or more. But what really did it for them was what David Ogilvy calls the big idea, and I like to call it the preeminent idea. And it's essentially 2 words put that product on the map and revolutionize them as a business. And the 2 words were simple: muscle confusion. Now, when you think about that, it's like, what does that actually mean? It means nothing. But at the same time, it means everything to them. They basically said they played off this idea that your body has muscle memory. If you could confuse it by doing a whole bunch of different crazy workouts all the time, then your metabolism will keep burning. And it was an idea that people were like, I get it. And they latched onto it. It was Domino's Pizza 30 minutes or free kind of concept. It's Seth Godin's Purple Cow. It's Tony Robbins' Come Walk on Fire in the Parking Lot. Not necessarily anything to do with what they do, except for the fact that people can remember and latch onto that. So I remember, like, even in this conversation, the reality is if we were to talk all tactics, the people who get off this and watching this or listening to this, maybe will remember 1 or 2 things. But they may remember some of these other concepts that we talked about because of either a story that was told or B, a concept that we talked about, like muscle confusion, like the 117, like some of these various other things. So it just kind of is ingrained in me. It's like, how would I remember this? And then based on that, how can I give something in my market? Like, how can I put something to my marketplace that would allow them to remember it as well?
Brilliant. I mean, Nick, that is amazing. Is this part of your legacy right now? Like, talk to us a little bit about that. I mean, the theme of the show is people that are choosing legacy over currency.
Yeah.
You didn't imagine yourself being in Facebook ads. You're crushing it now. You're literally, one of the leading experts in the space. Mm-hmm. Where do you kind of see your legacy?
Yeah, I definitely not necessarily in the Facebook space. Like when I die, I don't want to have it on my gravestone like he was the greatest Facebook marketer that ever lived.
Number 1 ROI.
I mean, it's great. And I think it's fantastic and it's great positioning for what I do now. Legacy is a word that kind of scares me a little bit because of it almost feels kind of like a goal, but it's bigger and nicer. So I'm friendly towards it, but I mean, I had my first child about 12 weeks ago. My priorities have shifted. Like legacy to me is like, I want my kid to say that my dad loved me unconditionally. And if that's all the world knew about me, then I'm happy. Like all this Facebook ROI stuff and business and entrepreneurship, I realize that all this can be gone tomorrow. If it is, what does that say about me? But if my wife says she had a great husband and my kid says that my dad loved me unconditionally, and somewhere in that process, by me living the life that I live, I could bring a little bit of light to someone else. I just want people to think like that guy knew how to live life and he knew how to love hard and love well. I think that's, if there is such a thing and if that kind of makes sense, that's what I would hope the legacy would be.
I mean, Nick, I just got some goosebumps even just as you're going through it. I was like, man, this is great. Last question for you. The show is called The Inner Changemaker. What comes to your mind when you think of someone being
I think at the end of the day, what it probably comes down to is just being like the best, most authentic version of you. And then through that, change happens. So what I mean by that is that a lot of people are trying to pretend to be some people that they aren't. They're trying to be that perfect image on Instagram because they saw, someone post a picture of, hey, I want to be like that, or I want to live in that house or whatever. And so they're trying to be a whole bunch of things that they really aren't. I think the greatest change comes when you're an authentic version of who you are. And then rather than, trying to give out of something that you don't have or even receive something that you aren't. I think the greatest change comes from an overflow of you being the best version of you and living and understanding that however you know how to. And then out of that abundance, kind of the people around you start to change and try to adapt and kind of bring out the best version of themselves. And I think that's really what it is at the end of the day. I don't think it's about creating beautiful technology that solves like world hunger, although that's a great thing. I don't think it's about renewable energy sources or whatever, although I think that's a great thing. Um, I think when I can be the best version of me and then the people I come around, it helps bring out the best version of them. Somewhere in that, something beautiful is going to happen that just kind of makes things better for everybody. And that's been a journey of mine. It's like, you know what, I was for so long trying to be all these things that I wasn't. And when I finally came to terms with like, this is who I am and I'm going to be the best, and I'm not perfect, I'm perfectly imperfect. But if I could be perfectly imperfect in the best kind of way I know how, I'm trusting that beyond the ROIs and beyond the ads and beyond the business and beyond the cars and the houses and all that, there's something good coming out of all that. So that's my best hope that I could wish for.
Well, Nick, I think you're a perfect example of a change maker, someone that is in that pursuit of not just business, but also trying to be the best father, trying to be the best husband, be the best person you can be. So I applaud you for the work that you do. And,
Thank you.
I thank you so much for spending the time with us. If people do want to learn more about Facebook ads, considering we do have one of the best right in front of us, if you're listening to this in your ears, literally, where can people kind of socially stalk you, or where, if they want to love on your, your family photos and your baby pics and stuff like that, where can they find that?
Well, like there's only one social platform that I play on, and it is in fact Facebook. So you can find me and follow me on Facebook. I'm the only Nicholas Kusmich on the planet, so it's very easy to find me. There's no one else. You won't bump into anybody else. I'm the only one there. If you want to learn Facebook ads and stuff, we have a group of about 13,000 or so people that's growing at about 100 people per day, where we just kind of talk about Facebook. And there's some really brilliant advanced marketers in there, and there's some beginners, and everybody helps everybody. It's a great community. That's called Facebook Marketing Mastery. If you want to really, really step up your game and you want me to really be involved with helping to generate leads for your business and that sort of thing, we do have our 2-day intensives. That's at nicholaskusmich.com/intensive. That's where you spend 2 days with me. I'm over your shoulder, small group, 20 people, and I'm just like pouring into your business and giving you the best that I got for that. And of course, at nicholaskusmich.com, like that page doesn't get updated much, but it's what I have going on. It's a great little brochure of what we have going on. But that's probably the best way is to stay in touch with me.
Well, Nick, I know you are well on your way to like blowing up. You're doing it right now. So it's an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for spending the time. And I can't wait to have you on again later on. But please go check out his stuff, nicholaskusmich.com.
Thank you so much, brother. It was an absolute honor to be here with you.